In the distance of Salt Lake City lies the ruins of a once booming lakeside resort. This booming resort was known as the Great Saltair. Now, some of you may only know of the Saltair as a concert venue, hosting artists like Alt J, Lainey, Post Malone, Billie Eilish, many more. However, Saltair has a story that begins far before the Saltair we know today. My Saltair journey began here, in Salt Lake City. Well, actually here, at my computer. See, I was looking at Saltair when I realized that I also saw a Saltair 2. That quickly led me to a Google search, typing in Saltair 1. I quickly found out after Google searching Saltair 1 that not only was there a Saltair 1 that looked really cool, but there's a Saltair 2 and a Saltair 3, and thus began my deep dive. I was looking up newspaper articles, I was looking up pictures of this place. I had so many tabs that people thought I was going crazy because I'm not a tabs kind of person. I checked Reddit, I checked Pinterest, I don't even use Pinterest, all in search of the truth of Saltair. Some people might even call it obsessed. I was definitely obsessed. So now I want to turn over all of the stuff that I found to you. So let me take you on the journey of the Saltair. Our story of the Saltair actually starts with the pioneers of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and when they were coming to Utah. After they traveled across the plains, they had arrived in the Salt Lake Valley. 3 days after their arrival in the Salt Lake Valley in 1847, they made their first visit to the Great Salt Lake. They quickly found that not only was the water really salty, it also was nearly impossible to sink in, due to the salt in the water. They returned several times to the lake to celebrate things such as the 4th of July and different family gatherings. Now, most of the early trips were to a place that they called Black Rock. In 1860, a house was erected with changing rooms for those that wished to visit. Black Rock can still be seen today when you visit the Great Salt Lake Park. However, none of its buildings still exist. The lure of the lake began to decrease due to the fact that it took 4 hours for them to get there by carriage. Things changed with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, and also in 1870 the addition of the Utah Central Railroad that connected Ogden to Salt Lake City. Lastly, in 1875 the Utah-Nevada Railroad that connected Salt Lake City to Black Rock. Quickly after the railroad had been completed, businessmen decided to capitalize on the new accessibility to the lake. Resorts started popping up. Resorts named Lakeside and Lake Point were the first resorts to open on the lake. Now, I think it's important to mention before I continue that the names of these resorts may get just a little bit confusing because half of them start with the word lake. So next, after Lake Point, a new resort opened called Black Rock in 1876. And yes, it's that same Black Rock from before. In 1879, Lakeshore opened its doors. And in 1881, Garfield opened its doors. While in operation, it was considered the best in town. Next, on July 15th, 1886, Lake Park opened its waters. Now, it's going to be important to remember Lake Park because it's going to come up a lot in the rest of the video. Lake Park, like many of the other resorts, offered swimming and just different activities such as dancing. It also featured an open pavilion designed by Richard Cletty, the same architect who designed the Capitol building here in Utah and would later design the first Great Saltair. Lake Park and Garfield were the most competitive until 1893. In 1893, the water of the Great Salt Lake began to recede, leaving behind this gross mud. Ideas of creating a wharf or pooling some of the water proved fruitless. 3 years later, in 1896, Lake Park's pavilion and merry-go-round were moved inland to Farmington. They also rebranded the name from Lake Park to Lagoon. And yes, that name does sound familiar because it is the lagoon that any of you locals would know. July 4th, 1887, Syracuse Resort opened its doors. In the paper, it boasted of being the only resort with shade trees. Now, all of these resorts are what led to the biggest one of all. See, in July 1893, it was announced that a new resort would be built called Saltair. The name Saltair comes from the close by Saltiar Beach Company, which was a salt mine at the time. Saltiar Beach Company would be the owners of this new resort, with the largest stockholders being the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, in looking into local papers, I'd be very remiss if I didn't mention the name Matthew White. This local businessman is who came up with the whole idea of Saltair. White owned 744 acres of beach property as well as a small house. He had an elaborate plan of not only the resort but also a small community that included 600 houses. Although the plan of the 600 houses never did quite work out, they began to construct the Saltair Beach Resort. At the time of its construction, the Saltair was being advertised as the Coney Island of the West. This place was huge. We're talking the total length of the decking was 1,100 feet, with the pavilion measuring 250 feet by 140 feet. Now, 300 men had been hired to complete the pavilion. Even though its original day to open was meant to be on Memorial Day, because they weren't done with everything, Saltair's opening day was a week after Memorial Day, 1893, and dedicated on June 8th. Over 10,000 people attended from all over Utah for its opening. Because of Matthew White's hard work, people could get on a train in Ogden or Provo and take it to Salt Lake, and then get on another train that would take them right to Saltair Resort. The first season at Saltair saw over 100,000 people. By 1906, it jumped to 250,000. And in 1919, it was 450,000. In 1903, a rivalry began between Saltair and Lagoon. You see, Saltair chose to sell their train tickets for 50 cents round trip, and Lagoon decided to sell their train tickets for 50 cents both ways. Mr. Simon of Lagoon even put out a statement saying, "Even though our crowds have not been as large as last year, they have been of the class of people that we want and really are more profitable to us." They essentially believed that if they could get half of the amount of people as Saltair does, but charge them double, then they still are winning. Going to Saltair was an experience. People would get on the earliest train and they wouldn't leave until the latest midnight train. They were so busy dancing and swimming. Now, something really cool about the dance floor at the Saltair was that they actually had two bands, and each band would be on each side of the dance floor. And when one band would stop, the other band would start playing their songs. The other thing that's crazy is one time they even had to ban the Charleston because they didn't want the floor to break in from everyone jumping at the same time. Saltair didn't just have dancing and swimming. They also included a boat that would take you around the Great Salt Lake, called the Tallulah. Saltair continued to grow, and each year it seemed like they were adding something new. In 1909, a ship cafe was built alongside the pier. They even had a contest that was run before the opening to name the new cafe. The name Leviathan won. In 1910, the Hyperdrome was built, which included an indoor bike racing track. Now, each year it seemed like they were spending more and more money. However, the biggest costs actually came in between the seasons. Winds and salt would corrode the wood structure. However, these costs were easily covered due to the success of the resort. In 1914, a roller coaster was added to the resort. During 1915, they added a tunnel of love. They added bowling alleys, a fishing pond, and in 1916, they even added a roller rink. As great as the Saltair had become, nobody was ready for the first of many tragedies to strike Saltair. On April 22nd, 1925, at 2:25, the newspaper states that an employee smelt smoke in the Hyperdrome. He found 4-foot flames and was able to beat it out to embers and then decided to go get help. However, the wind, in the 2 minutes that he was gone, struck the fire back up. The employees attempted ineffectively to put out the flames, while they waited for a fire truck to arrive. Finally, the Sugar House fire station arrived, and it took them so long because this was the only fire truck that could pump salt water. Around 4, the wind picked up, and within 10 minutes, Saltair was in ashes. Reports had been made that smoke could be seen from as far as Salt Lake City. Destroyed in the flame was the ship cafe, the Leviathan, and pretty much the rest of the resort. Insurance only covered $150,000 of the $500,000 needed for repairs. On April 25th, it was announced that it would be rebuilt using the same plans from Richard Cletting.